immediately thought, wow, I'm a total asshole. Like, that is a big deal. I'm the first at nothing, right? And so I have to confront my own bias for global significance. A bias we probably all kind of have to some extent, because that's a modern way of thinking super quickly. And we talked, and I told her I worked in technology, and she told me how online pharmacy companies weren't able to develop the kind of relationship and clinical acumen with the people that they serve that a local pharmacist is really able to do, and that she wanted to create her own pharmacy app just for grants. And like that got me thinking about spatial computing in a much smaller scale. You know, on 2D interfaces, you can adhere to really prescribed forms and best practices. Like iPhone, it produces one perfect single product, and apps have to follow these really strict tiers so you won't even get into the ecosystem. It's truly one interface to rule them all. Companies like Apple, they have this vision of just one single monolithic interface for computing worldwide, agnostic to place and culture. But that approach isn't going to work with this introduction of context into experiences. There's not one computer interface for Austria and one for the USA, like not one for Graz, one for Cambridge. My colleague Greg Tron, who leads the design of the operating system, he was traveling in Japan and he realized that the interfaces he was working on in Miami, where we're based, would have to change dramatically to be beautiful and functional in his Tokyo hotel room. In AR, there's this opportunity to deeply contextualize and to solve problems with singletons. And as problem solvers, especially like here at MIT, we don't really like to think about singleton solutions to problems, but developing sensitive, specific interfaces that have everything to do with a locale, a space, the services provided there, and the context for those services. That's the opportunity in this medium, I think. So I encourage you, for those of you guys participating in the hackathon or wanting to bring your, engage in this medium or wanting to bring your practice to spatial computing, as the medium kind of emerges as something more powerful and less kind of clumsy than it is today over the next few years, and you kind of dive headfirst into it, to really engage with its native capabilities to authentically integrate digital content into the real world, and to kind of sidestep our learned bias for 10x growth, for global impact, and instead, start innovating solutions that are site-specific and really sensitive to context. It may seem smaller, but I think have the potential to be more impactful. And to me, that's really the sort of the rich potential of this emerging ecosystem of mixed reality content, is a kind of a Cambrian explosion of interfaces, of interaction design, that kind of evolves ultimately to like landscapes of digital content folded really gently, really meaningfully into the real world. And so for those of us developing these platforms to support this kind of future of the spatial web, as people call it, how do we create an operating system, an internet, an app framework that themselves are extensible ontologies so that people can extend them to solve problems in specific locations with more specificity than you could on the one-size-fits-all sort of screen paradigm. And my guess of where to start is to look to where there's already a model for this, which is the wiki. And just like with the wiki, if you manage to find yourself on the blank page, on like the 404, then maybe you're the best person to write what's there. So, okay, so a couple of lessons learned for designing in mixed reality. The first is bias towards comfort. Physiological, social, cognitive, prioritize it in your design. I'm pretty comfortable talking like really optimistically about the future of ambient all-day spatial computing, like can't wait for it, like future, come get me. But as today of 2019, there's kind of an admittedly really high overhead of physical, social, cognitive comfort every time you put a computer on your face. So while we have to admit this, it's almost like a taboo in the field, but as Steve just last night was like, people don't like demos because it's just a little uncomfortable to put the design on. It's not that the experiences aren't cool. So we have to admit this. So while the experiences you build might be kind of like speculatively reaching for a future of all-day wear, and that's really cool. We should be doing that. Don't ignore comfort. At Magically, we really like astronauts, but we, more seriously, we think about this product as consumer-grade space equipment. Like you've got to gear up to explore new worlds, and just as a space suit's job is to keep you comfortable and safe while you do that, we imagine heads-up displays right now as like they have to prioritize a similar thing, prioritizing reliability, human and system performance, comfort, efficiency, user safety, user privacy, down to even the little details Lorena Pesmino and our team, and Jordan is another of our colleagues in UX, so he also could speak to this. She worked with Dalton Log, which is a London-based font sort of design studio, to develop a font really specific for the peculiarities of our display, so that it was really legible and comfortable to read. And that font's called Molino. This presentation is in Molino, so you can enjoy it. And some Magic Leap, or some Media Lab folks, they've come and visited us at Magic Leap a couple times. Different undergrads and grads have come for summers and J terms. And in one J term, Hisham and Gabe Fields and Jonathan Bushel, they worked on responsive typography that sort of morphed itself to become optimally legible at different lighting and sort of viewing angle conditions, and that to me is the future. It's so cool. But the point is to prioritize comfort. Okay, so comfort is really critical when interactions in this medium can be so embodied. We support all these different input methods on the device. It's kind of unprecedented for a computer to be this in touch with interaction in so many dimensions. And there's like lots of sexy stuff in there, so many exciting possibilities for natural interactions. And the emerging interaction model in VR, direct interaction, reaching out and grabbing stuff, pointers, leans in really hard to these new embodied human computing inputs like 6DoF, and so much so that I think we're starting to like parody ourselves a little bit with it, with experiences like Job Simulator, which is all about like how awkward your arms can be. So, but we took a different approach, or we had to take a different approach in designing the interaction for the operating system, and we based our interaction model on a 5-way, so up, down, left, right, and home. And one of the reasons we did this is out of an interest in accessibility technologies. The lead for UX, James Powderly, he has a background in sort of designing accessible interfaces. He developed the iWriter, which is an eye-controlled graffiti tool for an artist who is in the late stage of ALS. Building embodied interaction schemas up from a simple extensible baseline, they allow for more acceptable inclusive interfaces. Baselining at a 6 degree of freedom control requires a lot of mobility to use the OS, but baselining at a simpler schema allows lots of input devices to kind of extend that from gesture to puff and sip to a Bluetooth keyboard and trackpad. And so that's what we're doing. We have a long way to go, both in terms of are sort of actively working towards CBA and compliance to really truly improve the accessibility of our device, and also in improving just the general usability of our experience kind of comprehensively. So we're layering more embodied interactions on top of this baseline, including 6DoF pointer targeting and gesture interaction in the next few updates to the Lumen OS. So as we add these advanced multimodal interactions, an accessible fallback is always available where needed. And this design choice was about inclusion, but it was also about comfort for all. Some kind of keeping your arms up in the field of view of the display can get a little tiring, so you definitely want to fall back to other interactions sometimes. As you design for embodied inputs, of course, avoid fatiguing your users. And a sort of a mental check for that is to imagine that if on 2D interfaces, if the efficiency of an interface could kind of shorthand measured by the number of clicks it took you to get through a task, in spatial computing, you could now consider the number of calories burned as a sort of shorthand for the efficiency of your interface. Okay, so another dimension to comfort is social comfort. Okay, question. Important question. How does Magneto brush his teeth? Like, does he have a magnetic toothbrush or a metal toothbrush, and he just like stands there with his mouth open and like just the tooth, lets his mind powers do all the work? Like, superpowers are cool, but at some point you're kind of just showing off. And in the same way, you don't always know where your user will be. They might be alone, they might be in a crowded space in their office. And so the performative nature of some gesture and voice interactions could get socially uncomfortable or uncool. So as we kind of sidestepped the Minority Report vision of the future a bit for accessibility, for physical comfort, for social comfort, and also for my part, out of a bit of like a personal bias, because I'm a little like tired of some sci-fi. Like, at least the kind of sci-fi with that particular brand of futurism that's like muscular and dystopian. And I think my team felt the same. We were kind of inspired by a less cinematic vision of the future of HCI. Gentle interfaces, highly responsive to the slightest touch, UI that reveals itself at a glance, natural multimodal interactions. And we're like a long way from getting there, but that's our vision. Some amazing work done by our internal systems team and in the interaction lab at Magic Leap is exploring these interactions really fine-tuned to user intent based on the fact that as humans we interact with the world in naturally redundant ways. We use our gestures, voices, and gaze together naturally when we interact with the world, so much so that it's unclear with child development psychologists what we learn first. To point, to babble, to express intent with eye contact. Redundant input is natural and it gives users a choice. And point and shoot interfaces, they're the dominant interaction paradigm in immersive XR, but they aren't appropriate for every distance of content or size of content, for every social setting or for every user. I personally find that kind of triggering and everything and pointing and shooting it to be like a little distasteful, and maybe this is just me, maybe it is a bias, but during my time at Magic Leap, there were 2 public mass shootings in my county alone, one at the Fort Lauderdale airport and one at Parkland, just down the road from us. And it made me step back and question the semantic baggage of these kinds of interfaces. That's just me. I think some people feel that way, some people are less sensitive to it, but redundant input is natural, and it gives users a choice. So natural interactions, they bring us into a more harmonious relationship with technology. And the LumenOS, which is the operating system on Magic Leap, it was designed, or it is being designed, it's still a work in progress, in the spirit of harmonizing the virtual and the real. So we call the idle state of the OS the landscape. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to try it, but when you launch an app in the landscape, you put it somewhere and it stays in that place until you move it or until you delete it. So the landscape, it's got this nice part about the real world, which is persistence, and it has this nice part about virtual things, which is reconfigurability. And that's the idea here. It's blending reality with the best of physical things and the best of virtual things. My colleague Greg, who I mentioned before, he talks a lot about object integrity as a heuristic for designing virtual features in a splendid landscape. This literalism, it's both kind of a celebration of this new medium, this new ability for computers to kind of imitate the world, like a baby's sort of wobbly first steps. Like, let's make everything sort of look like it's really there or aspire to that, even if we know, we're still a long way in terms of the capabilities of the device. But it's also a useful usability strategy, and we've seen it in interface design before. Like skeuomorphism might be a punchline in UI today, but it was once a really critical learning tool. By designing with these metaphors from the productivity tools of the physical world, down to like imitating binding and texture of paper and ridiculous things like this, new mobile users could better understand how to use this new suite of productivity tools that were now in their pocket. And in the same way, I think we'll see more literalism and more of these like literal metaphors in the design of spatial computing experiences for a while, in the kind of early phase of this paradigm shift. And eventually artists and designers and the people in this room will all create new interaction patterns and concepts, just like we've seen in the development of mobile content, things that themselves are sort of really native to the medium. Authentically integrating content in the physical environment, it's like definitely a best practice. And it's more than just native to the medium, right? It's the whole point of the medium. So Create is an experience, that really delightful experience developed by our internal Magic Leap Studios team. And it demonstrates this really well. Embrace collisions, physics, occlusion where you can. And doing that is sort of recognizing that sometimes the spontaneity will happen. Oh, I didn't know that. Oh, this video is a little wacky. Let's see if I can pause it. Embracing that spontaneity will sometimes happen. Paul Hoover, he's a developer in our community, and he built up a swing in Create, and he put the dinosaur in it, and then he hung the swing from a tree in his yard, and it just was like swinging back and forth. It was the wildest thing. But emergent narratives in play are possible when you design virtual systems that react to the context of the physical world. So reactivity is interactivity. You can design a story that is interactive just by being reactive to context. I think that's pretty powerful. Now it's working. Okay, cool. So sometimes you don't know the physical features of the user's environment, or you're operating at the limits of system performance, and things, you know something's going to break eventually. And in that case, you want to degrade gracefully. A graceful degradation of realism is surrealism. This is a video. Let's see if I can get it to click. Oh no, I can't. Okay. So let's get. Okay, there we go. Sort of applying a surrealist's toolkit to your experience can help you navigate some of the unknowns of being kind of context aware. Portals, dioramas, convenient smoke screens, and particle effects, these are emerging motifs in XR because they're definitionally sort of spatially hand-wavy. right? Like particle effects and portals are how we've always imagined what breaks in the space-time continuum look like. So they're like the perfect kind of get out of jail free card for when something breaks in your sort of environment reconstruction of your application. And Tonami, which is another experience developed by Magic Leap Studios, is a great example of really leaning into these effects. Okay, less is more. You know, it's clear and purposeful UI is really critical. The interface and the visual experience of your app should always be clear and purposeful. Like in some ways, it sort of contradicts what UI designers are typically taught. We're classically taught like this Nielsen heuristic of recognition over recall. You know, reveal hierarchies, array options. Don't ask your users to recall how to use the system, but let them quickly sort of recognize their options in the interface. And that works on screens, but in spatial computing, pixel real estate is just so precious. Like every pixel you draw to the display is a pixel you take away from the real world and from your user's site. So it better be worth it, you know, if you're going to draw something to the display. Then our design teams quickly realized that the more minimal you rendered your interface, the more gently it would fall into a real world context. And as soon as we all started to do that, we hide our UI as needed. Like the button turf wars began, right? Because buttons are really like an already precious resource on our pretty minimal controller. But an easy way to clean up your interface is to sort of modally mash it on and off with buttons. But there are simpler strategies, and one of them is head post, you know, to reveal UI on head post gaze. A glance can start a conversation. We look at the things before we pick them up, and we look at people before we speak. Gaze signals attention, and UI, just like living things, can be reactive to glance, and I think that's really powerful. Something that surprised us when designing the OS and the core apps is how, you know, the same layout that passes a paper prototype test, it might be really difficult once it gets up on the display in the real world. And users might suddenly have trouble navigating it when it's overlaid on the real world. And that's, I think, because the real world is already really high bandwidth. The job of the interface in spatial computing is to go about its business without creating, without causing a user cognitive load. Human cognition won't evolve at the pace of human computing. And these screenshots are from a video I hope you've seen. If you haven't, Google it later. It's called Hyperreality by Keiichi Matsuda. And it came out in 2015, and it was pretty viral. A lot of people were talking about it. It's really well done. And at the same year that it came out, and we at Magic Leap were all sort of looking at this video and thinking, oh man, how do we avoid building that future? You know, if you haven't seen it, it kind of imagines a spatial web future that's gone off the rails, and it's just sort of pop-ups everywhere. And in that same year, my colleague James Hadley and I, we were working, some other folks in the UX at Magic Leap, we were working with a really small cross-functional team of designers and researchers and engineers at Magic Leap in this really critical transition that the company was going through, which is transitioning from being an R&D type of in an R&D mode to a mode of rapid productization. So we had about like 6 weeks to lock down the hardware features, the hardware feature set, the high-level architecture. So we had to make a lot of projections. Like hardware takes a long time. You have to kind of make some educated guesses. It was so early in this process and the process was so rapid that nobody really knew what the hardware would look like, what its battery life would be, what apps we would have on it, how people would use it, how much it would weigh. And so we were sort of designing really aspirationally, you know, like Magic Leap has always had this aspirational mindset, but we were definitely imagining what a product would need to be ready for all-day use, to be ready to kind of consume your whole device ecology. And one of the first features that we actually spec'd was this feature called the reality button. So the reality button was a button that was designed for the temple of the wearable originally, and the idea was a quick tap, it would immediately dim the display, mute the audio, suspend all the sensitive sensors functionality. And at that time, it felt like such a fundamental feature. Like in the future, you're going to be in mixed reality all the time, and sometimes you want to take a break. Or worse, you want to escape back to reality, you know? It was a feature designed for safety, for user comfort, for distraction-free social interaction at the click of a button. But as the hardware developed, it got bumped from the wearable to the life hack. As our product use cases matured, its purpose sort of fell out of relevance, you know? And in user trials, it really struggled with discoverability. It was prone to false positives. Even when its functionality was first turned on internally, it was like kind of met with a lot of confusion. Like our QA came to us with this strange new hardware issue that like when you press this button, the device totally stops working. And we're like, yeah, this is a feature, not a bug. We're like, that's reality that just happened to you. It's sort of a vestigial tale. You know, it's still on the device. You guys have probably accidentally clicked it at some point this weekend. It's like a vestigial tale on our hardware, right? It's like this awkward, and I think even a little poetic expression of like the techno-optimism and the sort of techno-anxiety that we kind of all simultaneously feel about this medium. You know, but mixed reality, it can't invent or alter the real world. We have to remember that. Like, I hate Black Mirror personally, because I'm optimistic about technology, but I think there's a little Black Mirror voice in the back of our head when we look at this kind of stuff. But like sunglasses attenuate sunlight, you know, mixed reality just attenuates the real world. That's all it can do. VR does create new worlds. You know, if you want to build a utopia, I think VR is the medium for you, in like a literal sense of the word, because as I think a lot of us might know, the Greek meaning of utopia literally means no place. VR is like the perfect word for the use of the word utopia, because you're nowhere when you're in VR. But in MR, or you're in somewhere else, you're in an imagined place. But in MR, you know, by its nature, it's always somewhere. Reality is always the desktop background of spatial computing. You know, like spaces have their own rules, and your app is always going to be playing within that rubric of real places and real faces. So as exciting as it is to imagine this like future of delightful new interfaces, it's going to be a little pointless if the world is garbage, because that's always where your app lands, you know? So your AR app, it's never going to take you to Trump's America. Alternative realities of spatial computing are surely going to be powered by this sort of matured versions of the same services that power, you know, this big tech products. And until this technology is accessible for everyone, its potential for impact is really limited. So we have to radically reimagine much more than what we put on our faces to have a real impact. But that said, there are opportunities, I think, to shift our mindset as designers. From the collective whole to thinking about specific communities, from like monolithic computing solutions to idiosyncratic interfaces that are more handcrafted. From exacting algorithm-guided information access to sort of serendipity. And from formalism to surrealism. And if we get it wrong, reality is still one click away. All right, thanks so much, and thanks to the whole UX team at Magic who did so much of this work that you see, the Interaction Lab, Systems Engineering, and thanks to the crew for Magic Leap here at the Hackathon, and thanks to the organizers and to MIT for having me back. I can take some questions.
Our team is building an audio-only experience
Sweet.
With the Bose AR glasses.
Oh, awesome.
One of the things that, you know, I think to your point, you know, we're really focused on embracing the reality and just contextualizing a little bit more. One of the things that we've been curious about is how we can create subtle modifications of an approaching activation of the technology.